Why is AI the future of financial accountability? Our guest today is Peter Reynolds. He is the CEO of Theta Ray and the driving force behind the company's vision to become the industry standard in AI powered anti money laundering. And today we're going to talk about Theta Ray and how they're using AI to transform the way banks, governments, and fintechs detect financial crimes while enabling de-risked financial digital inclusion in developing countries. I know that sounds like a lot for some of you. May not be very techy, but we're gonna bring it down to layman's terms and what that means for you as an entrepreneur, as a business leader, and how you can apply this in your arena as well. So, Peter, welcome to the Leaders to Transformation. We're glad to have you here today.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here, and I'm a great fan, and lovely to get the chance to be on it rather than just listen to it.
Oh, well, thank you. And we want to do a shout out actually to Alejandra Castellanos Barav. And she was a guest in, I mean, man, this is like forever ago, episode 185. We're over 525 episodes. This is probably going to be somewhere near 530. And so that was a long time ago. And we were talking about emerging technology coming out of Israel. And so we had a really great conversation and have stayed in touch. And she's the one that reached out because she's now working with you and what you're doing. And so thank you, LA, for the connection to this. This is awesome. And when she was talking about what you guys were up to and talking about, I'm a Canadian, so when you talk about TD Bank and the impact of, what's been going on with them in Canada, of course, my ears perked up and I was like, "Ooh, this is interesting." But this applies to everybody. And so let's talk about, first of all, your mission and why it is such an important topic right now.
Firstly, talking about Israeli tech to a Canadian is perfect for me, with a company that came out of Israel and has been backed by Israeli venture capital firms like JVP. But recently we did a round with Portage in Toronto. So perfect audience. Look, our mission is, to put it very bluntly, our mission is to reshape the future of financial crime detection and AML. And, imagine a world where everyone was guilty until proven innocent. And as silly as that concept would be, that's exactly what's happening in the world of AML. Banks have to assume something's bad all the time because they don't know it's good. And we'll talk about TD and some of the repercussions of when you get it wrong. And under all of that is this legacy tech problem, where legacy tech has been deployed, over the years across all of the global banks to detect financial crime and money laundering and all of these very important things that you need to be able to detect, and that they can't do it, and then just not very good at it. And it's not the industry's fault. For many years, the legacy tech players, the rules-based players, was what there was. Luckily, now there's been a revolution around AI that we'll talk about today, and there's now companies like Theta Ray that are very good at detecting financial crimes. So that's the mission we're on, and look, it is very important. $3.1 trillion of illicit funds went through the global financial markets last year. That's $3.1 trillion. 15% of that was attributed to terrorist financing. And we had the biggest increase of 19% in human trafficking around the world, 115,000 known cases.
Wow.
So, if you want to get involved in something that stops things like that, then solving this problem is more than mission critical.
Got it. Wow. Well, so just for those of us who are not super tech, when you say legacy tech, who represents or what represents legacy tech? Is that kind of like the old traditional technology, which platform, and it's maybe outdated, or like, yeah.
Great question. So, the legacy tech platforms, what we would say is rules-based technology. So
Okay.
if there's a payment of, if there's 100 payments of X amount to a certain person, flag them and say maybe they're the wrong type of payment. I think what the industry now needs is a different approach, because, rules-based legacy platforms, as I say, aren't very good at actually detecting what financial crime is. And think about it, the enemy, so the people doing financial crime, are using AI. They're using much more, sophisticated methods. So you've got banks that have these, big infrastructure that is very slow and hard to move, and they need to move into, much more dynamic, much more risk-based approaches to find this financial crime. And, when they get it wrong, there's, millions and millions and millions of dollars of fines. But even if they live with it, there's a horrible experience. There's, no efficiencies in the banking industry when it comes to compliance. And these are the things we look to address.
Yeah, got it. Well, so it's very interesting when you talk about human trafficking, or you talk about some of these, financial, even these crimes. A lot of times on this show, we've kind of been talking about the people that are front lines helping out. You're in the behind the scenes. It was a guest we had a number of years ago, Chris Wexler, and he was identifying where online how you can find the perpetrators of like child pornography and all of that, and those that are perpetrating that. And so it's like we got to go to the root and to the source of figuring out how do we identify these. And when you mentioned about, well, if 100 transactions are going to the same person, maybe it's something suspect. It's interesting because it's like the question is the wrong question, because like I have clients who have paid me, for years. What does that mean? So it's like you're asking when we ask the wrong questions, we get the wrong answers. We don't get the answers we need. And so it sounds like you're just needing to also ask different questions about what's an identifier. So maybe talk a little bit about that mindset.
Yeah, I think one of the beauties is that technologies has now advanced in many ways. So the sophistication, and it's an overused buzzword, and it's a problem in the industry. Everyone talks about AI, but the reality is that AI, take away it being a marketing tool, AI is really good now at being able to, in a very cost-effective way with great cloud computing software, to actually identify things like financial crime. So the way we work is that you look at data, very quickly understand normality. So normality in data, and then very quickly say, oh, well, that isn't normal. And then when you have that data that doesn't look normal, is it something that you've seen before, and what was it? And is it something the bank's trying to look for? And once you can do that, this will lead to the ability to say, okay, I don't need to stop all of those 100 payments to Nicola because someone paid her 100 times in 3 weeks because she's done some work. That is actually fine. But actually this one isn't. This payment doesn't look right. So this is one we think you as a bank should look into. And, the inefficiencies in the market are huge. And, we see that in the cost of payment. We see that in the time it takes to do payments. We see that in, how you can do payments between different parts of the world. And so that's where AI will come in. And we'll talk a bit today about actually the problem with the industry is we spend the time looking for the bad, but actually that's not what you need to do. You need to actually, by identifying the bad very accurately. So if I've got 100 payments and I can tell you 3 of them are bad, I'm actually telling you that 97 of them are good. And if I can focus my time on the good and make sure we have a great flow of funds around the world for the good, but stop the bad, then that's great for the financial services industry. And that's what Theta Ray is on a mission to do.
Got it. Oh, I like that. It's like a counterfeit and the authentic. How do you know what is authentic is, or what's counterfeit is you need to know what the authentic is. So that's good. Let's talk about TD Bank and their recent court case. You wrote a very powerful op-ed on that, and it was published by Tech Bullion. We'll have a link in the show notes on that. But, you were talking about rethinking compliance. We've kind of alluded to it, but maybe for some that maybe not aware of what happened with TD Bank, maybe just kind of explain that and how that has created such ripple effects through the financial sector in Canada in particular.
Well, firstly, I will say that my op-ed came from a point of frustration, really, because actually, I will say I hope it causes ripple effects. It really should cause ripple effects. Actually, the ripple effect should have started in the banks before TD. Go back and look at, Danske Bank got billions of dollars. And if you Google what happened to Danske Bank, there's some people who believe that the CEO committed suicide on the back of, being involved in this huge scandal. And the ripple effect should have happened all along. So unfortunately, what we find sometimes is that while we look at it and think that will obviously create change, it doesn't always create change. If you read up about TD, there was some money laundering, that they were found guilty of, and there was a huge, billions of dollars in a fine. And, I think the ripple effect should be, and I think is that if you get this wrong, the fines are going to be huge, impactful, damaging. There is, the global financial markets work on trust, and when you lose that trust, it takes a long time to get it back. And I think that this has caused a big issue in the industry. Now, unfortunately, sometimes you see that it takes longer for people to really learn from the ripple effects, and what you'll find, actually, I'll go back to my point earlier, that might actually start creating in compliance more of a no. So compliance and AML can become a limiting factor. It can be a negative. No, we're not doing it. And when you have big things like TD, and I won't go into details, but you talk about these big banks who have legacy system that can't find financial crime, and then they get fined, and then I think sometimes they keep going on those paths until there's a real reason to change and actually look at ways of fixing it. But I think what you'll find is that the industry now needs to try and turn that around and actually say, sure, if you get it wrong, there's massive fines, and it's actually not that hard of a problem to solve. And as I said, the way technology's evolved over the last 20 years makes it fairly simple to find financial crime in a way that the regulator is going to be very happy with. And, actually, I would flip it around to say, so if we do that, how can we grow and onboard our customers easier? If we have the right controls and risk-based approach to anti-money laundering, to financial crime, how can we serve our customers better without the fear of fines? How can we open new channels, and how can we reduce costs? Later today I'll talk to you about the problem with these legacy systems, and hundreds of thousands of false alerts means that you have many people spending their time looking at false alerts, which actually, if you try and find one thing in 1,000, you don't find it anyway. So it becomes very, very inefficient. So I think, to me, going back to my point about if you can become very good as a bank at saying, I can identify the bad, and I can keep my compliance teams and I can keep my regulator very happy that the program I have in place will identify the bad, I can then tell you that the rest of them are good. And by doing that, I can then spend my time growing my business because I've got trust. I can work in different parts of the world. And, TD Bank or any big global bank is not a bank in the country where they get fined. They're big global players, and they need to work in multiple areas, and they need to facilitate, global trade. It's important. Cross-border payments, remittance payments. How small businesses survive is if these banks have the right services they can offer. So it's really important to get it right. And yeah, the ripple effects are huge, and everyone's very excited about it. But I remember they were after Danska, and I think what the regulators are starting to get frustrated about is that these aren't hard problems to solve if you think about the improvement in technology. If you and I were talking, obviously not on a podcast, in 1995, and we would have said, well, this is the best technology there is, and we're doing the best job we can, and this is the risk of working in that industry. Fast forward for where we are today, actually that's not the case. There is technology that can easily solve the problem, that's fairly easy to implement, as I'll talk about later. And so you are going to find regulators and the global markets very unforgiving when these things happen, which is why you find the fines are so huge.
Well, and they've got so much money. I mean, it's not like these banks are struggling for resources to be able to put these things in place. They are big behemoths that are, it takes a lot to maybe make those changes, but I mean, they have the resources to do it. And so it almost is like laziness it's a harsh word perhaps, but to stay up on things. I mean, I think a lot of times, and we see that across the board, where it's like everybody's in status quo mode, right? It's like, keep doing what we're doing until all of a sudden we can't do that anymore because we get fined, or because there's such a loud, it's like somebody yelling, crying wolf out there and saying, hey, this can't happen like this. And this can't keep continuing to happen like this. Let's talk about Theta Ray and your product, your actual service that you provide, and who you provide it for, and so we can all understand like who would be a good client for you, and you know, because I mean, we're talking about banks right now, we're talking about financial sectors, we're talking about big organizations, institutions, and that's one thing. But what about the business owner, the entrepreneur, the leader of an organization of less than 1,000 people? Like how do they apply this in their business as well?
Yeah. So firstly, there's something you said I wanted to address when you said they have they can afford to buy these systems and they have the resources. There isn't, we work with some of the world's biggest banks, and there isn't a project we do that doesn't save you money. So it's actually even worse than that. Actually, you sometimes think that actually I can do the right thing and I can improve everything and I can save money. And so sometimes you wonder why people take so long to make those decisions. But we all know some parts of the industry move slow, and that's something that
Yeah.
we live with. Look, we work with a number of different sectors. We work in the banking sector, and the banking sector would be very big global banks that we work with, around the world, and people like Santander and big banks like that. We also work with smaller banks, and we have banks, across Europe, like Clearbank. We have banks in the Middle East, like ADCB and Mashreq Bank, and then we have banks in the US and what have you. And in the US, we have a real nice business growing in the regional banking space, which is something that's really important. And so, actually, what we do see in some of the smaller banks, the need to actually make these decisions quicker from a cost saving point of view, from a not wanting fine point of view. So we do see some great traction there. And then we work with fintechs, so they can be the biggest fintechs in the world, like Payoneer, Travelex, or they can be fintechs that you would never have heard of. We've got some amazing customers. There's a customer in Cape Town in South Africa called ClickSend Now, which is a remittance platform, where as a South African, if you want to remit money to New York, you can pick a price and send money to New York. And they have the same AML, financial crime requirements as the bank. So our technology works there. And I think that's one of the reasons why there's a big shift in that legacy tech, because if you are a startup and you've just a remittance platform, you might have 200 people, and the idea of spending millions on a big system infrastructure isn't what you can do. But a cloud-based, AI-based system that can very quickly get you to where you need to be across, you talked about products, transaction monitoring, so monitoring all of your transactions and finding financial crime, sanction screening, which looks at both the customers that you're making payments to and the transactions, and make sure the people involved in the transactions are allowed to be involved in transactions. And then we have something called customer risk analysis, which is how, when we onboard customers and when we do due diligence checks across time on these customers, which are the ones we need to focus on. So where are my high risk customers, and where are my customers where I don't need Nicole to come to the branch every quarter to give me more documentation. I'm looking at her transactions. AI tells me they're pretty safe. The regulator's happy about how I'm doing it. Don't worry. These 5% of my customers, actually, I want to stop them working until they do actually give me documentation that I can see is good. So that's the kind of range. And when it comes to, you talk about business owners, the lifeline of our economy, I think where we get very, very involved is by supporting those fintechs and those banks. We work with many corporate banks, SME fintechs that are enabling the payments, around the world. We have customers that, people are maybe working jobs in the US and sending money back to families in Nigeria, and if you don't have the right protection and controls across those channels, they can't do it, or the fees are too much. So very much involved in the movement of any kind of transaction around the world in a safe, cost effective and regulatory approved way.
And how did you get into this?
Yeah, so great question. So I have been involved in very fast-growing Israeli tech for many years. I did my a law degree in London and kind of fell into the fintech world. I got into banking and then fell into a fintech really before they were called fintechs and before it was called SaaS. A great 10 years at a company called Reval, and had a great time there, and then got to meet firstly JVP, one of the big investors in Israel, who had some great payment companies. They take a very sector-based approach into what they do, and I was very interested in those sectors. So I helped run a global payment company called Funtech, which ended up now as Finastra. It was gone through a few different phases, but helped grow that and really learned my trade there, and then worked in some other companies, including a very big successful company called Earnex, and then came to Theta Ray originally as the chief revenue officer, and then just over a year and a half ago became the CEO. And that was where our kind of real entry into Canada was through we raised some money with Portage. And our focus before then has always been, getting into the North American market as well as growing our global markets. So that's been my journey. It's been a great journey, a lot of fun, a lot of ups and downs, but it's a great way of growing a business.
What is the biggest obstacle in bringing this to? I mean, you can have a service that people need, companies, organizations, institutions, whoever need, and yet there's resistance to it. Maybe you alluded to it about the cost, and it's actually a savings. It's like reframing it for them. But yeah, I'm just curious about that, in terms of bringing it to market and to who needs it the most. What has been that biggest obstacle? What is the biggest resistance?
Yeah, look, I think, there's no single point. I think you need phenomenal tech. Like we're now in
Mm.
an arms race, really, when it comes to tech and AI. So, firstly, you need good tech. The world's changed from kind of being sold on tech to seeing the real output of tech. So, job number one is that we work very hard on having the best tech in the market that can do a great job and it can
It's very
identify
competitive, right?
crime. Sure, there's lots of every single financial institution in the world has to do what we're doing, and so there's lots of tech out there. So number one, I think you have to have a very compelling tech, and then you need a phenomenal go-to-market. You need to look at the world in different ways. You need to firstly look at that fintech business and how you get fintechs, and we have a phenomenal challenge. We have customers from fintechs across Australia. We have customers in Singapore, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, Somalia, and I'm only stopping in a few places. My mind, I wasn't ready for the question, but across Europe, from UK, France, Spain, across. I think we have customers live in South Korea, in Japan, and then obviously the US markets and South America and Canada. So firstly, that go-to-market has to be relevant to all of those different areas. And
Mm-hmm.
then the biggest, I think, obstacle, or probably what we've turned into an advantage, but the biggest obstacle you'd have is that these are very regulated businesses. So I talked to you about working with Santander. When you work with Santander, they have to be regulated in each country by central banks, European central banks. The number of regulators they go through is very big. And so they expect their vendors to be okay with all of those different regulators. So regulatory becomes something that you have to spend a lot of time on. So one of the biggest focuses I have as the CEO is to make sure in all those different areas. Take the US. We have a regulatory advisory board that help us on, how do we make sure we grow our business in a way that the US regulator is going to be okay with, because of course all of the banks are going to say, what are the regulators going to say? When it comes to AI, things like model explainability, all of this becomes so very important. And, we've worked with some very big, advisors in the area like K2 who help us make sure that this is what you'll need in the US, and make sure we have it. So that becomes a challenge that you have to, spend a lot of time on. But as I said earlier, I think if you get it right and you can show a bank how how happy the regulator is going to be that you do it, and this is what they're asking for, and here's the documentation, and here's the use cases, and this is the other banks that are being used, then it becomes an advantage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I thank you for that. Yeah, because every business has a challenge, right? Every business. And then I love what you said there about turning it into that obstacle. Oftentimes the biggest obstacle is also the biggest opportunity when you learn how to turn around. So one of the things on this show, Leaders of Transformation, is about creating transformation in the world. But it's also even just transforming the way we see ourselves, others, the way we see the world around us, the way we see opportunity, right? So it's like a mindset around that. And so, it's overcoming those obstacles as entrepreneurs to figure out how do we solve that. I think one of the biggest questions, that we can ask ourselves, or I guess the biggest mindset, one of the most important mindsets to have, is that I may not know this, or we may not know this, but we can figure it out, and we can bring the right people to figure it out. So it's good. So what advancements, what changes do you envision? Obviously, there's a lot of changes in terms of AI, a lot of, huge opportunity and growth and all of that. But as we look into the future from where we are now, what do you see?
Yeah, look, I harp on a lot about it, this move in the industry. Forget Theta Ray, forget anyone. There's going to be a massive move in the industry to go from legacy technology to new modern technology. You can't have, been in the world and listened to your podcasts. You can't have missed the advancement of technology that's happened and how there are now better ways at solving problems. And it's across the board, we see it. So I think, as I said, decades before, you were using the best system you could do. There's been $100 billion spent on the best legacy technology. It just doesn't solve the problem. And so I think you're going to find that. But I think the move is going to come for a reason. So I won't mention the bank, but in the Americas, we have a global bank that's implemented in a country. And they reduce, by using AI, they reduce the number of false positives by 500,000. Now, preparing for our call, people will give you different views on how many cases a case manager in a bank can look at a day. So I went to ChatGTP and they said between 20 and 40. So if you think about there being 500,000 false alerts for a bank to process, that someone can do 20 or 40, you can imagine the teams of people. So there's you trying to send money around the world. It's stuck as a false positive where someone's saying this could be financial crime. And more importantly, they got approval from the central bank of the country to use the models they were using, so that those 500,000 disappeared. So no more false positives. So no more people needing to process them. Suddenly your financial crime team can start working on things that are way more strategic. Go to your instance of banks that have been fined. There's millions of more things they could do than look at false positives. And like all of this, when you're looking at 500,000 false positives, you and I would probably agree it's pretty hard to find the 4 pieces of financial crime in 500,000. Whereas if you look at 10, you can identify them. So I think that's one of the big changes to AI. And I think where the world's going to, the race at the moment is around the quality of AI. And actually where I get very excited with my team is looking at that blend of human cognition and AI. Because at the moment, the problem with AI is that, firstly, AI will sometimes it can be very basic, but let's assume you've got great AI. AI will definitely tell you that something's wrong. But if you really want to make an impact with AI, is you're going to be able to make human decisions. So if you read a lot of the research, some of the Teslas of this world, what they're trying to do is they're trying to bring in cognitive understanding into AI. So how can I make a decision, and how can I learn from what humans want, what we've seen, to make decisions in a way that are explainable and very much understood by a regulated institution and the regulator. So where we're thinking is, and where we're trying to get to is, imagine if you could use AI to read a compliance document. That compliance document might say, we're not so happy about money coming from Syria at the moment into New York. I make that up. I obviously no view of mine. But if you had that document, AI could read that document and it could say, hey, Nicole, you didn't ask me to find this, but this looks like money that's coming from a place that your documentation says you shouldn't. Or, hey, we've seen this before. I know you weren't asking me to look for the proceeds of animal poaching in Africa, but we've seen this before and this doesn't look right. And so that's where we think the next phase of the future of AI is AI that's going to be able to have that cognitive thought, and it's going to be able to really actually become a real value add and help the banking industry. So go back to my point on you mentioned TD, but any big bank, if you've got legacy system and rules, it is going to be exactly as good as the rule you write. So
Yes.
if you write a rule that says if someone comes into a branch and deposits $50,000, do not accept it, that's a great rule. But in the hugely sophisticated way that money's moved right now, you can't even claim that you'd be able to write every rule possible. And that's go to my point of all these false positives, because you're trying to have such a broad rule set.
Yeah.
Imagine if a bank like that had a solution that says, hey, I know you weren't asking for this, but we've seen these types of transactions before. I would definitely look at these. This is the way the industry is going to evolve. And it's that blending of cognitive and artificial intelligence.
Wow. It's fascinating when you think about like what is possible with AI. And I know there's a lot of people afraid of their jobs, but if you want to get a job and you're just coming out of high school and going into college, you might want to look at, AI and really understand and become somebody who is well versed in it. There's such huge opportunity, and I love the fact that it can free up our time and our energy once it's implemented. Obviously, it needs to be managed, but so that we can go and do more creative things and innovate, more in other areas. And so I love that. I love that.
I couldn't agree more. My daughter's a great 14-year-old daughter. She's a great sports fan, and they often sport eats into other things. And the agreement my daughter and I have is the one club it won't get in the way of is she does coding. Because I've said, listen, if sport doesn't work out, I look at the talent we hire, and I get the absolute beauty of watching teams around the world hire the best talent. We're all looking for those A players. And the talent we're having right now around the data engineering, the data science. I mean, we have set up an office in Madrid recently, or it's not recent anymore. It's kind of 5 years, maybe more old. But one of the reasons we did that is because we saw a great young talent base of people with AI. We had banks in the region. We've got a team out there that are smart, phenomenally good with customers, a really young vibe office. And it's totally, the skill set you need going into this world around data engineering, data science is something that's going to give you a lot of options if you have.
Yeah, absolutely. As we wrap up, I have a question about cryptocurrency, and we didn't talk about that beforehand, you and I. But how does this play in with crypto's currency?
Yeah, so lots going to go on with crypto. So I'm going to try and avoid any political sides on this conversation. But if you look at the world right now, you're going to see some people saying we should deregulate crypto and others saying we should regulate it more. We work with a lot of companies in the crypto space, often the money in and out of crypto. It probably doesn't surprise you that as a regulator, as a central bank, as a bank, one of the things you're looking at is the money going into crypto. And of course, that's really, really important, and not turning that into something that's completely unregulated. But then there are some people who say, hey, let's deregulate it and make it easier to use crypto. I think ultimately, though, you're going to find the society, the world we live in now, is always going to want to know about certain criminal activities. So, there isn't no one's trying to make money laundering easier. No one's trying to make terrorist financing easier. No one's trying to make child trafficking easier, human trafficking, poaching. And so there will always be the regulators around the world who are looking to make sure that they have the controls in place to understand. That would be would be my bet. So it's something we've invested a lot in. We have customers in the crypto space. It's a fantastic, fascinating world of monitoring transactions in crypto and understanding where the flow of funds is going. But you are right to say it is something that's going to be a huge area. If it became completely unregulated, and if it became something that money could disappear into, then you'd see that would be a weakness in the system. So that is something that I don't think the world would want to happen.
Right. Last question, maybe. Last question is there an area of the world that is like countries that are, I mean, maybe the Western world is more receptive to it, but is there an area of the world that is lagging behind in this area? Like who's leading and who's lagging?
It's a very good question. I think a couple of ways to answer that. So you see a lot of innovation in payments across Europe, and you often find where the biggest take up of the innovative solutions comes when there's huge amounts of payment gateways. So if you take a European bank, they're all doing cross-border payments, correspondent banking. This opens up a lot of risk. So they spend a lot of money on innovation around compliance and making sure they can grow their business, onboard customers, make sure the regulator's happy. I think we have a very big business across Africa. I think there's a lot of institutions in Africa that are looking to make sure that they have done the right things, to make sure that there's the payments going through the organizations are the right kinds of payments. I think that you do have, in the Western world, you have very powerful regulators. So go back to my point, if you didn't understand what the regulator expected of the bank or financial institution to carry out the correct, best practice, AML and governance, then you'd find it hard to get the technology implemented. So that's, I suppose, something that, but I actually don't, in this day and age, I see it as there's no country that sees it as more critical. It's just something that every country has, because we've gone away from the country model. If you think about now, the new global citizen, the new global business, I'm a fairly small company, and we pay people across the world. We have people in places where it's hard. We have developers in Eastern Europe. We have people in Israel, Dubai, Madrid, New York, London, and even us paying payments around the world. We see how complex it is. So the bigger you are as a company, the bigger the complexity. And I would definitely say any organization that has a global or more than one country, then doubles the problem they've got, because suddenly I'm operating in two countries, two regulators, two different sets of rules. So no, I don't really see that there's a country by country focus. I think it's everyone trying to get to the same stage. Now, there's countries that are grey listed. There's countries that the regulators have said, hey, you're not doing enough. But once you're in the system, it can spread around. So even if you've got a weakness in one part of the world, if they've got a relationship here, you can see how you need to look at the flow of funds going country to country.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. Because it's like, what's the weakest link? And sure. So, yeah, that's good. So this is a cloud-based software. So people can go on your website. So ThetaRay.com. We'll make sure that's in the link in the show notes as well. So they go on there and they can learn more about it. And so they're utilizing something. So whether they're a small company or a large financial institution, you have different offerings for them. Maybe just to clarify that. Yeah.
Sure. Banks, fintechs, we have some government customers, transaction monitoring, sanction screening, customer risk assessment. But also, if you go to the website, there's lots of thought leadership pieces, webinars, different views on how you do things around the world. I think one of the biggest learnings I've always had is that to become successful in industry is that you have to become a key part of that industry. You'll be part of that industry ecosystem. So we spend a lot of time making sure that we understand each ecosystem we're working in, and that you have to be an advisor before you've got to be an advisor on a problem before you're allowed to solve the problem.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Peter, thank you so much. This has been insightful for me because I don't know a lot about this area. I know it's important, but I don't know a lot about it. So thank you for enlightening us today on the importance of it and more importantly, what you're doing about it. And the some of the technology that's available to be able to solve these problems. And I love what you said in the beginning. It's like, this idea of guilty until proven innocent versus there's 97% of, let's say, of the transactions that are good transactions. And we want to be able to allow those to move through because I think any business owner has had that experience, right? Where it's, there's been a delay at some point. I remember years ago with her family business going and depositing, large sums of money. I was like 18, 19, 20 years old. And the bank manager didn't like me and didn't like us because that was outside of her realm of, comfort and possibility. And so she wouldn't tell us, but she'd hold our checks and she'd do all these things, and it creates havoc, and to have that much power. But I appreciate, obviously, you want to make sure you know where it's coming from and so forth. But we had the track record. But those kinds of things can create havoc on business when their transactions cannot be processed quickly or people can't be paid. Like you got to pay your people, you got payroll, and so forth. This all has to happen, and so it's important. It affects everybody. It's like, oh, well, this is all up here, and it's a big, it's big bank issues, fintech issues, but it does trickle down to the everyday user. It does trickle down to the small business person. And so that's why I thought it would be a really good conversation to have so that people can know what's going on behind the scenes. So thank you for that.
And you just hit the nail on the head. If you can take a no industry of compliance, and you talked about TD Bank, you can see why there's fear of getting it wrong, and turn it into business enablement and actually show how you doing it right means you can grow and do more. You do that, and I think that's the vision I have, and that's the mission I'm on.
Yeah, I love it. Well, Peter, thank you so much. Appreciate you. Appreciate what you're doing and wading into these deep waters to make sure this all happens effectively. And I always say leaders of transformation take action. So for listeners, for viewers out there, take action on something you learn. Maybe it is just to educate yourself on some of this. So just expand your mind. Sometimes we get so narrow in our focus, so narrow in just doing our day-to-day things, to step out and to look at the world and have a bigger perspective. It'll actually help you in being more innovative and creative within your own space when you come back to that narrow space or, and niche where you're in. And so just to have a bit of a global perspective and understand, and even just to envision what would it be like if maybe your business is only in one country or maybe two countries, but to recognize that, what would it be like if you could actually do business around the world? How would you do that? How would you do that? If you were to do business, because we have some people that are listening that are they're in a local area, and then there are others that are global companies. And so just kind of, making it relevant to everyone is to look at that from a perspective and saying, hey, what would be possible? What would it look like? And if you are an organization that this is something, go to ThetaRay.com and find out more about how you can implement this system. If you're a fintech, if you're, in that space, SaaS space, go and learn a little bit more about it and how you can make sure that you can do what you do better as well. We encourage you to do that. And we'd love to hear your stories. We'd love to hear how this has impacted you. And you can reach out to us, of course, through our website, leadersoftransformation.com, social media. We're all over social media. We'd love to hear from you. And if there's any topics that maybe we haven't talked about that you'd like us to talk more about, post that in the comments as well and let us know. We'd love to be able to bring that to you. We'll bring the experts, just like we're bringing Peter. We're bringing the experts, people that know and that are the best of the best in the world. We'll bring them to you so you can learn from them as well. So we encourage you to do that. Thanks for being here, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week on another episode of the Leaders of Transformation.